I can't say it all started about 18 months ago, but something definitely did. I'd been invited to speak on a panel. I entered the venue and was met with the usual awkwardness of people who don't know each other making small talk over canapes. I sat down on the stage and greeted my fellow panelists, and immediately I felt this sense of calm rush over me. My shoulders dropped, something in my stomach settled, something grounded, and I felt this quiet confidence settle in. The panel began and the calm quickly dissipated. The topics were difficult, triggering even, and I felt my nervous system tick into fight or flight. And then the mic was passed to me. My heart was in my throat. My scribble of dot points looked like caterpillars, and my brain had officially left the building. And when I opened my mouth to speak, my voice shook. I looked to my fellow panelists, and I felt that same grounding sensation wash over me. And I suddenly felt comfortable enough to guide this intimidating audience of UN ambassadors, reps from academia, activists, students, through this unplanned breathing exercise. It was what I needed, and I just hoped I wasn't alone. And when I looked around, I saw looks of relief, faces relaxing, shoulders dropping, and we were off. And the speech went great. The audience was engaged, I was bantering with the panelists, and I left the event on such a high. And it lasted for days. And I found myself wondering why. It didn't make any sense. I had been unwell and off work for an extended period of time. I was surrounded by boxes and admin and goodbyes, packing up a life I loved in Geneva. And I faced a daunting move back to Australia to be close to an ill family member. Nothing in my life was calm or settled. But after that event, I was. And I wanted to know where it came from so I could bottle it up, put it in a drip, and attach myself to it. Eventually, it hit me. For the first time in my life, I had been in an accidental majority. When I'd looked around me at that panel of 5, I realized I was one of 4 South Asian women. For the first time in my life, in my 30s, I just happened to be around people who not only looked like me, but we were not there because of the colour of our skin, because of our cultural identity or our gender, or a combination of those things. We were not speaking on a topic relevant to the region, nor were we in a cultural space. We just had professional expertise relevant to the topic. But I knew that culturally and professionally, to an extent, we'd all have had to overcome similar barriers in order to be there. Now, I'm explaining all of this to you, but the point is, I didn't have to explain any of those things, any of those fundamental parts of who I am or how I got to where I got to those women. It was a kind of belonging I hadn't experienced before, and I was blown away by how it felt and what it gave me on that day. And of course, that's what I want to talk to you about today, belonging. Now, I did go down the rabbit hole of looking at definitions of belonging, because that's what you're supposed to do on a TED Talk. But none of the definitions I found, if I'm honest, really resonated with what I felt on that day. So I instead wanted to begin with what it felt like, that whole body exhale, that calming, grounding sensation, confidence, ease, energy. And upon reflection, for me, that came from knowing that those women just got it. And somehow that allowed me to put down this invisible load I didn't realize I carried into most spaces. So I'm not going to tell you about what belonging is. I've talked about what it felt like. I will, though, tell you a little bit about what it's not before we go on. First of all, belonging is not singular. That means it can take different shapes based on where you are, who you're with, what you're talking about. It's also not static, meaning it can and will change over time, just like you will. And certainly for many people, belonging is not simple. And that brings me to the many reasons why I want to talk to you about belonging today. Because while it is not simple, it is important. And because we're in a moment where it's shifting, and I believe we can help shape it. Okay, so why is belonging important? First of all, because it's essential to human survival and human flourishing. You all know how the story goes. For tens of thousands of years, we humans lived in small nomadic groups where we had to operate in teams to survive. We had to hunt, gather, protect little ones, and that was best done in numbers. Our bodies are wired to reinforce that. At the first hint of exclusion, our nervous systems activate and propel us to get back to the crew so that we don't have to face a rogue attack from a hyena alone. Relative to human history, though, things have changed pretty quickly since then. Now, instead of living in groups of up to 200, where animals are our main predators, we live in a hyper-globalized, technologically advanced world of now 8 billion people, and we're the top of the food chain. Technically, with a certain amount of privilege, you could live alone, work remotely, have food delivered to your door, and never leave. But our bodies are wired for belonging and for connection. In fact, the World Health Organization last year declared that loneliness is a critical global public health concern, worse than smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and with greater risks associated with it than things like obesity and lack of physical exercise. So on a fundamental level, belonging is not just important, it's critical for our health and therefore our survival. Another reason belonging is important, though, is because it can be powerful. That calm, grounding sensation I felt wash over me that day, that came from the regulation of my nervous system, something which gives us the ability to manage stress, to think clearly, to understand our needs, and to adapt, connect, and respond better. Simply put, with a regulated nervous system, we are better placed to navigate challenges. And let's be real, this world is full of challenges. We live in a time where things like exclusion are increasingly being used to seed harmful things like hatred and division. Having a sense of belonging can help make it difficult for those seeds to grow. And we know that we can be greater than the sum of our parts. The energy we get from standing by people who just get it, that's a key factor in building movements which drive social change and have done so across history. So of course, because belonging is important, it's unsurprising that we find ourselves in a moment where it's difficult to find. In a world post-borders, post-agricultural revolution, tech revolution, you name it, you could find yourself in a situation where your ancestors were born in a place that you're not allowed to enter. Your grandparents and your parents may have had multiple migrations. You might have been born in one country, grown up in another, but you live here now. You have different languages, cultural and spiritual practices to the people around you, and you might be neurodivergent or queer, carry a disability. The layers are endless. And of course, if you have belonged to a minority group or multiple, it just gets harder. So belonging is critical, powerful, kind of important in this moment in human history and becoming more complex and more difficult to find. Great. That's not overwhelming at all. But it does bring me to why I think it's important to have this conversation now. What I realized 18 months ago was that while the world is fast changing, belonging is too. And I want to talk to you about how we can shape it so it better reflects us and the world we now live in. Now, to do that, I should probably tell you a little bit more about me and my experiences of belonging. My grandparents were born in Pakistan, or what is now Pakistan, and survived the partition of 1947. And at various points during the 50s and 60s, they found their way to England, where my parents were raised and where me and my two younger brothers were born. And we moved to Australia when I was in primary school. And even though I was just little, I felt the complexity in my sense of belonging straight away. I wasn't Australian enough to be in with the kids at school, and I wasn't Indian enough to be in with the very loving community I now found myself growing up in. That community was largely made up of first-generation Indians, meaning that they had just migrated from India, whereas I was third generation. My grandparents had left. I didn't speak Hindi or Punjabi. I didn't know any pop culture references or what was in fashion. My family had different mannerisms, different cultural and religious reference points, all of which were frozen in time 3 generations ago and infused with their journeys along the way. All of this I now know is not uncommon for a third culture kid, but uncommon doesn't mean obvious. Anyway, I travelled as soon as I could find the opportunity, and everywhere I went, I found new senses of belonging. New senses, new spaces, new fits. And after travelling, working, studying through various regions, I found myself living in beautiful Geneva. And then, as things do, they changed. And I decided to pack my life up in Geneva and make the move back to Australia. And it's at this point that I found myself on that panel, mid-packing, and having this realisation that I was just in an accidental majority. And this was followed by a gut-wrenching realisation. People in a majority could feel like this all the time. This calm confidence could just be their baseline, and if they've lived in a majority their whole lives, they likely wouldn't even know it. Now, this gut-wrenching realisation was followed by 2 more. 1, I'm a migrant. 2, I'm a woman of colour. Now, I've literally just told you my story where it is obvious that I'm both a migrant and I'm a woman of colour. So why were these such shocking realisations to me? That day, that experience, put into perspective parts of me that had shaped my entire experience of the world to date. I mean, of course they had. But that experience, that was the first time I experienced viscerally what it could be like to be someone else. Someone surrounded by people who shared their baseline. A month later, I found myself back in Australia after nearly 7 years of living away. And I was excited to be reunited with family, friends and community who I'd missed. And I was determined to find the friends and community who met parts of me that I hadn't found a place for yet in Australia. I can't say it all started 18 months ago, but here's what did. I began to consciously meet and accept the parts of myself, my identities and experiences which had shaped my experience of this world, and I didn't stop at migrant and woman of colour. I recognised for myself that I am a 3rd generation migrant out of India, 1st generation to Australia. I have lived across regions. I carry particular value sets. I tried to get as specific as I could, and the more specific I got, the more I turned myself to those truths, the more I started meeting people who carried similar ones, or who just got the essence of it, even if it looked differently in their lives. I also started to share those parts of myself and my life, and that didn't mean getting up on stage and talking about myself despite what this looks like. What it looked like instead was hallway conversations with another woman of colour at work who referenced difficulty accessing her grandparents' stories in India, sharing that we too lost language. In fact, my grandparents spoke up to 8 languages each, and it just wasn't seen as safe for them to teach their children in England in the 60s. Sharing moments with other third culture children who found dance, art and food to be powerful cultural connectors because maybe they go beyond language and beyond place. Creating spaces for us to say, me too. And importantly, I was experiencing these spaces as well. I wasn't the only one sharing parts of me and my life. Others around me were doing so as well, in conversations, online, books, in movies. It's been quite a process. And what that process has felt like is a mixture of grief, relief, joy, and empowerment. Grief because we've been going on all this time thinking that we're alone in our experiences, and we didn't have to feel that way. Relief because we realised we're not alone. Joy because we can celebrate our shared experiences. And empowerment because we are the ones claiming those spaces and because we can do more with them together. It's by collectivizing our shared experiences that we are creating new spaces of belonging, ones that truly represent the huge diversity of identities and experiences we can carry in this complex world. So I don't have to be Indian enough or Australian enough or English enough. I can belong to the groups of third culture kids all around the world, to the Indian diaspora who grew up here in the 90s, to that incredible group of South Asian women who sat by me on that panel. Now, this has been a lot of information. And perhaps this isn't something new. And if that's the case, I hope you're sitting here feeling affirmed and not bored. But maybe this is also the first time you're considering the concept of belonging, that it might be more significant than a good feeling, and that perhaps it is complex. Either way, where do we go from here? We live in a world where not much space is given to value things like belonging, community, connection. There's a lot of focus on what you have and what you don't have. So this is an invitation to let belonging matter and to turn your attention towards it, to notice how it feels in your body, to meet parts of yourself and accept them. Meet parts of yourself and accept them, the ones that have shaped your experiences of life, to share them where it feels safe, and to be part of the creation of new spaces of belonging that both reflect and celebrate the complexities we can carry today, and in that, create more spaces where more of us can flourish and where things like division and hate cannot thrive. Now, Asha introduced my talk as When I Met My People, but actually, I had changed the topic of my talk because I realized I haven't finished meeting my people yet. And as I continue to learn more about myself and the new and expanding spaces of belonging, I'm really excited to meet more of them. And I hope you are too. Thank you.